Good morning. This morning, I have two intentions. Intention number one is to encourage, and intention number two is to educate through encouragement. So, today we're going to talk about confidence. Look, um, wisdom wins the race, not pace. And I'll explain what I mean by that here momentarily. But this morning, we're going to talk about confidence, and hopefully, I'm not on here too long, but we're going to go ahead and we'll get this knocked out. Now, the confidence piece. When we look at confidence, there's two major ingredients for confidence. All right. The two major ingredients for confidence is pace and scaling. That's right. Pace and scaling. Now, when we look at pace, right? Pace, scaling, repetition, when we look at pace, pace is very important in the beginning and is very important as we move throughout building confidence. And the reason that pace is important is because let's say you have an individual that's just learning to do something, whether it be an exercise, an activity, whatever it is. They're just learning to do something. It's very important that we look at the pace and the scaling. The reason it's important that we look at the scaling is because if we're going out and we're learning to do something new, that's going to be very uh mentally draining. It's going to take a lot of mental effort, or it's going to take a lot of physical effort. We don't want to exert so much mental or physical effort onto that person that's trying to learn this new thing at one time that they quit. We don't want to do that, right? So, and this is very difficult for a lot of leaders because they don't know how to gauge how much a person can do, right? They don't know how to gauge it because they may be inexperienced themselves. They just may think in their heads like, hey, I was able to do X, so they should be able to do it too. All right. So to get away from that mind frame, we have to look at scaling. Now, if we go out and we put too much too fast, it could lead to the person quitting. All right. Now, the example that I like to use is this. Let's say you have an old car. Like, let's not even say old car. Let's say you get a Lamborghini, right? And this thing can go 200 miles an hour. But for 30 years, you drive that Lamborghini 50 miles an hour, no faster, right? 50 miles an hour. And then after that 20-year mark, you decide, you know what? I'm gonna open this bad joker up and I'm gonna see what it can do. And you step on it. Guess what that Lamborghini is gonna do? If you just go 60 miles an hour, it's going to break. It's gonna break because even though it was designed to achieve those high speeds, you never use that part of it. And this is why scaling is important when we talk about leadership. You have to scale. You have to do the right amount at the right time. There's no saying we used to have back in the day was that a leader would find the breaking point of said individual and they would add 10 pounds to it. A good leader can add 10 pounds to it so that it would just take them out of their comfort zone enough so that they could grow. And once they got used to it, they have a new comfort zone. And then we repeat that process, not breaking the person, right? So scaling is very important in the beginning. We have to know how much a person can take. We have to know, like, we have to find these things out. And sometimes, there's going to be trial and error, but there's signs. There's always signs. There's signs that this is too much for a person, right? And you have to pay attention to those signs, right? Now, the other part of scaling, and then we're going to move on to pace. The other part of scaling is this. When when we look at scaling, right? You have to understand that everybody's not going to be the type that can just get dragged through the mud and beat down and they're going to just pop right back up. You have to make it achievable. Make it so that it's achievable for them. You take those small little wins and we string them together, and now we have what we refer to as a winning streak. And that's what we want to do. We want to just take small wins, string them together. And we're not saying let anybody get over. We're not saying to allow them to not meet the standard. That's not what we're saying. What I'm doing is giving you a blueprint and a framework to get someone to meet the standard. Sometimes that standard has to be broken down into small pieces that can be digested. And once those small pieces are digested and they digest enough of them, now we can actually meet the standard. Now, that's the scaling piece. Let's talk about pace. Pace. I said wisdom wins the race, not pace. Right? Here's why pace is important. I have a little story about when I was a younger man. I ran track, right? So my event was the Open 800. I did fairly well in it. I would typically make it to the 3 years that I ran, I made it to state every year. Well, the very first year that I ran, I made it to state, and my coach decided to have me scratch in the Open 800 at state so that I could actually run with the 4x4 team. Now, this was a great idea. I had the stamina, I had the speed. I could definitely run a 400 and do a really good job at it. Now, there was only one problem with running this race. Now, for multiple months, I've ran the 800. I've conditioned my mind to run the 800. I know I got to do 2 laps around this track as fast as I possibly can. So there's timing that goes in there. There's a mental state that goes in there. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes in there, but my mind is set on running the 800, right? So I get out there and I'm going to run the second leg of the 4x4. So I get that baton and I'm off. Poof, I take off, right? I take off and I'm running and I'm running and I'm running. And when I get done, here's where the problem lies. When I got done with the race, I felt great. And any runner will tell you, when you're done running that race, you should not feel great. You should have left everything on the track. But here's where I say pace doesn't win the race, wisdom does. I didn't have the wisdom to pace myself properly so that I could have taken more out of the tank and probably gotten a faster time. And I got a pretty good time. And this all relates to leadership with the pace piece. We have to set a pace that's achievable by those that we lead. Like you always hear us say, hey, look, we can only go as fast as our slowest person, or we're only as strong as our weakest link. And this is true. This is true. You have to set a pace that everybody can move at. You have to set a pace that everybody can move at. If you don't set a pace that everybody can move at, then you're going to have problems. Now, the third part of this confidence conundrum that we have here is repetitions, right? I once heard somebody say that it takes close to 3,000 repetitions to perfect something. All right, 3,000 repetitions. And I think they said that's roughly 20,000 hours, right? So if you look at that and you spread that out, I think they said it's about 20 years before you can actually perfect something. Like 20 years, 20,000 hours, 20,000, 20 repetitions, 20,000 repetitions, right? Now, when we look at that, there's another thought process that comes into it as well. And here's that thought process. Now, you have some people who practice, they do those repetitions until they get it right. You have others who do it until they can't get it wrong. And that is where we need to go. Now, if we couple the three things that we just talked about, we talk about scaling, doing what's appropriate when it's appropriate for the appropriate person. Then we talk about pace. We're moving at the speed that's required at the moment. And then we come back and we couple that with repetitions. Okay. Do it until you can't get it wrong. You have just laid the foundation for development. You've just laid the foundation for development. And if you can take this foundation for development and you can apply it to your organizations, I promise you, you will have success. Hey, look, you are important, you matter, and don't let anybody make you feel as if you are insignificant. If you do, get into the inbox, and we got people here to help you. The NCOPD Live team is helping you. Let's Talk About It is here to help you. And the Woman's Intentional Podcast is here to help you. Now, here's my one last thing that I am going to say. The last thing that I'm going to say is this. I heard somebody say one time that, our attitudes are the one thing that we can control. And with our attitudes being the one thing that we control, your attitude is also contagious? The question I ask you to ask yourself today is your attitude worth catching? Oz here signing out. I'll be talking to you soon.